Coffee with Caregivers production costs are covered by a partnership with United Healthcare and the National Foster Parent Association. We receive no federal or state funding and depend on our constituents and viewers to help us achieve our goals to provide support and services that meet identified needs within our mission. We would like to welcome the viewers of Coffee with Caregivers to the family. The National Foster Parent Association offers several membership opportunities for individuals, child placing agencies, and state and local affiliates. You can join today or donate at nfpaonline.org.
Well, good morning.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Debbie. So I'd like to welcome our audience back, really, to Coffee with Caregivers. We took the month of April off to plan our episodes for May, June, and July. And so, Debbie, you are our first guest in May. And I just can't think of a more perfect way to start out the National Foster Care Month than having you on as our guest. And so we've got wonderful guests lined up this month that can really speak to foster parents and about foster parenting, and to those people who worked so hard to support our families in the various roles that they play. And I know you as an attorney, but you're going to explain all that after a while about all the various things you've done in your life. But you know, when we talk about those people that support foster families, we're not talking just about the case managers or case workers or social workers and all the whoever, whatever they're called in their local area, right? That help them meet the needs of the child in their care and also their own families. But for those other folks that we work so closely with, like the judges in the courts and attorneys for the children, ad litems, we call them that in Texas, therapy people, all of those people who we network with on a regular basis in order to ensure that the children in our charge are getting their individualized needs met. And no easy challenge. And every foster parent knows that it is a challenge. It doesn't come easy. There's never enough services to go around or timely or available or whatever it is. And so the role of a foster parent is tough sometimes. So I'm going to introduce my coffee cup right quick, Debbie, before I formally introduce you, because I think it's kind of a segue into why I ask you to be our first guest in May. And my cup says saved by grace and coffee. And, you know, I got to thinking about that, and I'm thinking, you know, it was kind of like that way every single day, every single morning of the 27 years we fostered. And you know, you can't do it alone. I mean, there's foster parenting is not something you can be isolated and do. And to be able to share what you feel, what you need to have, information you need to have to feel comfortable about telling others when you need help, you know, not thinking they're going to think you don't know what you're doing and you're not a good foster parent and going to take the children away and all those kind of things that oftentimes happen, particularly for, I think, for newer families, because they haven't learned that this is not something we do alone.
No.
So when I was reading your book, which we will introduce, and I see the pile there behind you on the desk, that's awesome. When I was just beginning to read the book, in the very first couple of pages, actually, I came across these two sentences, and I knew when I read them that this was going to be a book that I was going to be able to embrace and that everybody else, I think, will be able to too. And the two sentences were, loving children is not enough. Commitment is far more powerful than love.
Yeah.
Because, well, why do you do? Oh, because I love kids. Well, yeah, you do. Or you wouldn't do it, right? Probably, right. I hope, because you've got to love kids in order to be effective. But it's so much more than that. And you've drilled down to that, and I so appreciate that. So to our audience, it's just really my pleasure to introduce you, Debbie.
Thank you.
And if you wouldn't mind just talking about, who you are and how you got to the point of writing a book, and then we can go into some of the aspects of the book, if that's okay with you.
Okay, certainly. Yes. I started out, my parents were very involved when I was growing up with camp ministries and youth ministries and church ministries. So I sort of grew up with that as a normal part of my life. And then when I got out of college, my mother was working at during college, my mother was working at a juvenile detention center. And I did a lot of volunteer work there. And when I graduated, it was just sort of natural to tap into her network, and I got a job as a probation officer with the juvenile court, one of the juvenile courts in Metro Atlanta. And the job actually was more social worker than it was probation officer. I back then, no one quite knew about all of the family issues that were coming up, and they thought, oh, we'll take the easy cases, the runaways and the school truants, and we'll give them all to this one probation officer, and then the more experienced people can deal with the really delinquent kids for shoplifting and breaking and entering and that sort of thing. So I got thrown into this caseload of kids. It took a while for the industry and to not industry, but the services to realize that kids don't run away from home just because they want to join the circus. So there were lots of deep problems that I got involved in, and this was in the 80s. So it was before we really knew what we were doing with trauma and the impact on kids, and the field has just taken leaps and bounds in its knowledge since then. So not surprisingly, I got burned out and just got tired of dipping out the ocean with a teaspoon, is the way I phrase it. So I went to law school, although I still stayed, I never have lost my passion for working with kids. Even during law school, I worked as a group home or a weekend house parent at a group home there near the law school. And then when I got out of law school, once I sort of got settled, I have career ADD, so being settled is not my normal mode in my jobs. But when I got as settled as I ever get in a job, I started looking around for some volunteer opportunities. And at that time, I was in Virginia, and I stumbled on the Volunteer Emergency Foster Care Program, which was semi-licensed but not paid, and I just worked as respite care and emergency care when they would pick up kids at 10 o'clock at night and needed somewhere to keep them until they could find a stable placement. That I was one of those people. So it worked well with the strictures of my job because I could take kids for shorter periods of time, and if I had a trial or something, then I could say no, or they could get the kids moved by then. Then I found myself in North Carolina as a criminal prosecutor. I was with the federal government, and my jurisdiction included the Cherokee Indian Reservation. And because of my background and I think the fact that I was the only woman on staff, they gave me all of the child abuse cases. So once again, I found myself using my social work background and working with the crimes against children issues. And again, started looking around for volunteer opportunities and found a really wonderful private placing agency that I worked with. And originally they used me for respite care on the weekends or short term. And then gradually, because they had such a robust respite care program, they were able to start placing children with me long term. And then when I had a trial that took me out of town or other commitments, they could arrange respite care for the child so that we were able to make it work because of that. And Yeah, I was still single at the time, so it wasn't like I had a husband who could take care of the kids when my trial took me out of town. But that agency was extremely good at working with those circumstances. So I spent a number of years there in North Carolina, and then family considerations. My mother had a stroke. My brother and sister were raising children without my advice. So there were several reasons I needed to come back to Georgia. And one of my foster daughters, who by then had aged out of the system but was still with me, she moved with me. And I never actually got involved in foster care in Georgia, because by the time that daughter moved out, I had fallen in love and gotten married and had stepchildren that I needed to raise. And as the younger sons got older, the older sons hit problems and moved back in with us. And then at one point, one of my former foster kids hit a bad patch, and we inherited our foster grandchild that my husband and I raised until adulthood. So it's been quite the journey that I never would have predicted when I started. So
my husband and I say that all the time. Who knew? Who could have guessed, right?
And I don't know if I would have had the nerve to have started if someone had given me the entire scope at the time I first started. I probably would have curled in a ball and just refused to even do any of it. So, yeah, God knows what He's doing when He gives us things a little bit at a time.
I agree. Yeah. So now we have this wonderful book, and one of the flyers that I got about you, and where it talks about your book, it's the title of which is Raising Other People's Children. I'll just show you, is this one. What an awesome flyer that is, Debbie.
Thank you.
You're beautiful, and it gives some really good information on it. But you're doing a good job of promoting this book, and I'm so glad about that. Like I said, because it's really good. But as I was looking at some things, let me see if I can find my notes. Where did I have that? Here. You had some real purpose to why you decided to write your book. And so you talk about the lessons that, you learned or became priceless, and that you wanted to be able to share some of those things and try to help especially new folks who are coming into this,
right,
not have to try again or reinvent the wheel over and over and over, but take some of the wisdom that you've gleaned over your experience and try to put some of those into practice instead of having to do the hit and miss like we all did in the beginning.
Right.
And one of the things that I always talk about when we're saying, I'm asked all the time as the executive director of NFPA, well, what are some of the things that are happening now that's not good for foster care? And one of the things I bring up is, we have an aging population of foster parents, the tenured ones that are leaving every day now. And we're not raising up many new tenured families because so many people come in to adopt ultimately, and then they leave. And so my huge concern is where do we go to find the families who have the wisdom that they've gleaned over 10, 15, even 20 years of parenting other people's children and figuring out what do I have to observe? How do I do this? How do I do this? And they're going to be gone.
Right.
And we're not raising up new families who have near the amount of experience that they need in order to have learned those lessons, right?
Right.
So I think that was one of the other main reasons why when I saw your book and was talking with our dear friend Rhonda Scortino about it, that it was so intriguing to me because you are looking to provide those wise things, that you learned and you learned the hard way, mostly, probably, like all of us did.
It is, and that's what I have a lot of stories in there about times when I just failed and what I learned from it, and what the kids taught me. And when you ask how it came that I wrote the book, it's all Rhonda's fault, actually, our our mutual friend, because she and some of my other friends, when we would talk about my adventures foster parenting, and then also I have friends who were getting into step parenting and were trying to figure out, they would talk to me, and I would say these things such as, we're not the people who are supposed to be in these kids' lives.
Yeah.
And the reaction from Rhonda and other people was, well, that's brilliant. And my reaction was, well, no, it's just the way it is. There's nothing particularly brilliant about that insight. It's just recognizing where these kids are coming from. And
Right.
so it was the realization that over the years, the lessons that I have learned, I have internalized so much that I don't really even think about them. And so I was encouraged by folks to put it in a book and tell some of my stories, and help new foster parents understand just the perspective and the attitudes we have to come with. And part of the motivation for my book was when my husband and I inherited our foster grandchild. I realized in some ways, single parenting, foster parenting was easier for me because I didn't have to consult with anyone else. I didn't have to worry about my relationship with another adult. I could just make my decisions and move on. But once I was married, I was part of a team. I had to work things out with this wonderful, caring, generous man who sometimes didn't agree with me. And I just had a hard time understanding.
Yeah, sounds familiar.
How someone normally so reasonable could get things so wrong. And I realized part of the problem was our arguments sort of sometimes boil down to him saying, I have raised 5 kids, and me responding, well, I've parented a lot of traumatized kids. And trying to explain what trauma does to a child. And of course, he had divorced and he had seen the impacts with his children, but this foster grandchild we had was a whole new level of trauma. And normal parenting techniques, his go-to toolbox didn't work very well. And some of my go-to techniques didn't work very well. So it was a real struggle to find new techniques that did work. And so I wanted to put that in the book. And then also, the other thing that I wanted to combat was a lot of, and I got into this with rose-colored glasses. I was going to be the person who would make a difference in this child's life and make everything perfect and everything wonderful. But children have agency and they make their own decisions.
Yeah, they do.
And, human beings are wired to think in terms of stories, and children also think in stories, and they are the heroes of their story. Every story has to have a villain, and sometimes we are the villain, and there's nothing we can do about that. So my husband and I both have experienced the pain of, we have 2 of the 7 older children are estranged from us, and we don't hear from them, and we only know how they're doing through hearsay, and that's hard. But it's not a reason not to try. And
right. That's right.
That was the other message that I wanted to say in my book, is that there are no techniques that are perfect. And if you try something and it doesn't work and the child rejects it, it doesn't mean you're doing a bad job or that you're terrible or that you shouldn't try with your next child. For us, 5 out of 7 great relationships is it's a pretty good track record.
Yeah. We experienced that with one of our children as well. All of our kids were adopted. And one of our sons was absent for about 11 years. Didn't know where he was. hard, but
It's very hard.
he had to figure out who he was.
Right.
And because he just couldn't get over why he had to go into foster care in the first place as a very young child, and considered himself unlovable.
Right.
So he did everything he could to make himself unlovable to everybody who came around him.
To prove it, of course.
But it took him until the age of about 32. And at 32, he came home.
Right.
Now we have this wonderful relationship with him now and his family.
Right.
But that 11 years in there, we didn't know if he was alive or dead.
Mm-hmm.
Because nobody's seen him. I still don't know where he was all that time. And that's okay. That's water under the bridge. But, I think we all, whether our children are born to us or whether they come to us by phone, which all of mine actually came to us by phone. We built our family by phone. It didn't make any difference because, we had to figure out who they were as unique individuals. And I know from watching my brother and his family and my cousins and their families that, with kids that were born to them, those kids were as different as night and day within those same families, know. So that's just the way it is. And you're going to have that. But I think that oftentimes foster parents do feel like, well, I shouldn't be able, I have to have an answer, I have to be perfect. Expect
to be able to fix this.
Yeah. None of us have that kind of skill to help fix everybody, especially if they don't want to be fixed.
Right.
And I didn't understand that very well until a son I was talking about that left and was gone for 11 years, joined our family. And that's when I really realized that this is going to be up to him. Mm-hmm. No matter what I do. I'll plant every seed I can. Mm-hmm. And he'll decide which ones are going to grow and which ones aren't. That's just the bottom line of it.
And the knowing, this was the hard thing for me too, because that comment that you made about loving kids is not enough. You have to be committed to them. You have to. It may be with me. It's just sometimes it's just sheer stubbornness that I said I was going to do this, and by golly, I'm not giving up. To hang on to kids when they don't want you to hang on to them. But at the same time, you have to have boundaries and you have to model protecting yourself and taking care of yourself. You don't self-sacrifice to the point of not being able to help your other kids.
That's exactly right.
When they come back. So for me, it was learning that being there and being available whenever they came back, whenever we had a prodigal son moment and they came back, to learn to say, I love you, I care about you, I'm thrilled that you're back, but I'm not giving you any money. Mm-hmm. So just as one example.
Well, we had to do that. Our own kids and a bunch of foster kids who had lived with us over the years that kept thinking they could come back to the well, especially every time they'd have a new child and say, hey, Grandma, you're grandma again. Can we have some money for diapers?
That's right. Exactly.
That kind of thing. Absolutely.
So
you got to try, I figure
that's
right. Effort, I tell them, but
Right. And so, there's kids that for a while I would hear from them every once in a while, and then they were short-term kids, and they would. So I had invested in them while they were there, but I don't count them as part of the 7 long-term relationships that I have.
Right.
They would come back, they would test the waters, and then they would wander off. And because I've moved and they've moved, we've lost touch, and the chances of our finding each other are real slim. But you just have to let them make their own decisions for their lives. And sometimes they will accept what we have to offer, and sometimes they won't. Sometimes, like your son, they will eventually accept it and come back. And other times you'll never know what happened to them. And that's a risk you take with any child.
Yeah, it is. And, but I think it really helps when people like you with experience, lived real life, lived experience can communicate with folks, and you do it in many ways. You have a book now that you're doing it, but you do unbelievable training sessions, webinars, and you've done that for us at the NFPA on our training institute. I'm so grateful for that. Just so many ways that you are sharing your experiences and your knowledge freely. I mean, that you want to do that, and you're taking time from I would assume is a very busy work schedule to do things like this. And it's so meaningful. And I think it's important that people understand that you do this voluntarily, at least for us. And we really do appreciate that.
Well, you're a great resource for folks. And I will say sometimes the loneliness was a hard part for me as a foster parent. Nobody around me really quite got it and understood.
Including our families.
Right.
What?
Yes, exactly. Do which? And I remember one of my former employers said, I just, what is it, Debbie? You have some desire, because I was federal prosecutor at that point. They said, you have some desire to explain to the FBI that this really isn't your marijuana that's in the back of your car. I just don't get this.
So. Yeah. We always, it got to be a joke, but it certainly wasn't a joke, but it was, because sometimes you have to have really crass humor to stay a foster parent, right? But
valid humor is
you got to have it.
And an underrated.
We had the local county sheriff's department on speed dial.
Yes.
We didn't even have to push 3 numbers, 911. We just had a speed dial for that one. Especially we took teenagers the last 10 years of our 27 years.
When you get
runaways.
Like,
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Right.
You just get your system down for runaways run away. It's their coping mechanism, and you learn how to make the call, make the report, go on with your life, lock up the house and go on vacation. Whatever's next on your list.
I know one time it was like 11 o'clock at night, and one of the boys really went off and got a knife out of the kitchen. He was going to hurt me. He was going to hurt me. And ran and, grabbed the phone and punched in my number. And he took the phone away from me, hung it up. And so I didn't know if my call went through or not. It was so quick. But it didn't take long. And here comes we lived out in the country, a sheriff's car up the driveway. And, before they even got out, here comes another one up the driveway. And,
right.
So they came in, intervened. And then the third car came up. And I said, why do you have the third deputy coming in here? Everything's under control. He said, oh, he's bringing the chaplain. We thought Mike could use a talk with the chaplain right quick while we talk with this young man. And then the chaplain's going to spend some time with him. And by gollies, the chaplain came in and talked with us, and our other kids were up, and we just had to get calmed down a little bit. And then they took this young man and took him out in the field. We had 2 acres in front of our house, between our house and the farm to Market Road. And they were out there for an hour, standing in the dark in the midnight at night, talking. But how many people get that kind of service from there,
right?
Law enforcement, because they know it's a teenager going nuts over here, it's this family's house. Oh my goodness. It's like, and then other people find out when, how can you do that? Why don't y'all quit? Why do you do that? They don't understand.
No, you just
any more than my mother understood when we first started.
Why are you setting yourself up? There's just something you just can't let go of these kids until you absolutely have to.
Right.
And I understand that. Yeah, I was never in that situation, although I always had dogs, so that was always my back. I always had dogs who were willing to get between me and anybody else. So it never got to that point with any of my kids. But I joke when all my friends have teenagers, and I say, well, Two things. First of all, the aliens will return their brains one of these days. You just have to wait it out. And secondly, call me, because I have had every conversation from who is this strange person hiding in the closet in my house at midnight to no, I'm not going to bail you out of jail tonight. We'll talk tomorrow. So it just you learn to have these
You do.
And I remember one of my I talk about this in the book. One of my moments when I felt like I really had succeeded, at least in teaching a child, was one of my foster daughters went out shopping with her biological sister and a couple of friends, and came home, and they were arguing out on the front porch. And I, not that I would ever eavesdrop, I just happened to find myself standing near the open door in my living room, and heard my daughter say to her sister, "No, I am not going back to the mall with you. If you get caught using that ATM card that you found in that woman's wallet, then Dad will bail you out of jail. But I live with Debbie, and she will let me stay there." So
That's right.
I thought, good, we have, and sure enough, the sister and the friends went back, used the card, got caught, discovered to their horror that although they were still minors, they were under criminal law adults, and ended up with a criminal conviction that barred them from employment in retail for I don't know how many years it was before they actually found a decent job. So you love these kids, you're patient with them, you care about them, but they need to know where the boundaries are, and that those guardrails can keep them safe.
Yeah. Well, it's something that, I observe a lot now, and I guess everybody does, about how seems like many people are raising kids very differently now than they were before. We used to call it tough love, and we had all these words for it, and kids need to have consequences for their actions. They need to experience those. And if we can nurture those experiences to where they're not dangerous for the child, they need to have those
well, that's one of the
experiences.
Things I talk about in my book. There's several things that I think we do know now about trauma and what it causes kids, and that we do have to give them some leeway. However, that doesn't mean we let the pendulum swing to giving them an excuse.
Exactly.
Their trauma is not their destiny. They can become resilient, and we still can expect things of them. The other point that we are learning from our self-esteem culture and our studies of helicopter and lawnmower parents, I think are the phrases that I hear often, is that children benefit from benign amounts of stress, that the psychological system is like the physical system, that if we want children to not get measles, we vaccinate them. And actually studies are showing that children who grow up in pristine, medically clean environments, their immune system never develops.
That's right.
But we give them a vaccine, which is a tolerable amount of measles or whatever, and it stimulates their physical immune system. Now, we don't treat them by dropping them down in the middle of the measles ward and hoping they survive. We give them benign, tolerable amounts. We're now learning psychological systems work the same way. Our children need to have their psychological system stressed so that it develops. Now, traumatized children, it's been overloaded, and we have to recognize that.
Right.
But to take an example that I use a lot, non-traumatized children who forget to take their lunch to school, they need to go without lunch. They don't need their parents bringing their lunch to them. They need to learn how to cope with that and plan it. Now, a child who's had food insecurity, that might be a triggering event, so you might not be able to do that. But not every traumatized child is going to be triggered by everything.
Exactly.
And so there are areas where you can help them by stressing their immune system and letting them live with the logical consequences of their decision. And I talk in my book about with my youngest stepson, the parents, the school system was absolutely appalled one semester. He was having trouble with one of his classes for the first time ever. He was having trouble with class. And the school kept saying, well, we can do tutoring, we can do this, we can do that. And whenever we'd present it to our son, he'd say, no, I've got it. We thought, well, I don't think you do, but okay. And the teachers in the school were really shocked and surprised that we were willing to say, well, let him try it his way. Because they kept saying he could fail. We said, we know. and we're okay with his failing a class. It will. And my husband and I, now we talked and discussed it long and hard before we were willing to accept that. But we finally decided that the life lesson was more important than the grade. And that if he really did fail it, it would be his problem. I always tell my kids, if you have to take a class over in summer school, you're paying for it out of your allowance. I am not paying for you to take a class that you have every ability to pass. So he knew the consequences and he was willing to risk it. And so sure enough, he just barely passed. But he learned enough skills. He graduated as an honors graduate from
there. You go.
So, but he did that on his own, and he
exactly. Because one of our boys, I guess he was 14. He had joined our family when he was 10 months old, and was part of a sibling group that was separated out, and we got the little one. And then at 4. The rights were terminated, and we adopted him. So moved forward to 14. And he and a couple of buddies from school went and stole some parts off of a motorcycle that were in a junkyard. So it wasn't usable, but there were parts on it, right? I'm sure the junkyard man sold parts off of those things, right? Of
course, they always did.
And that was how he was making his living, right? So, but these boys went and did that, hid the parts on our property. Of course, along a fence line in the weeds. And, well, they got caught. Then they figured out who did it. And so when they hauled him in and were taking him straight in front of a judge. And so we went in there and we were sitting there, and the judge said, well, why'd you do that? I don't see you have been in trouble before. I don't see a record. No, sir. No, sir. He was really contrite. And he said, well, why would you do? Well, I mean, I was so abused as a baby. I had to go to foster care. And then, and then they were my foster parents, but now they're my parents. And he kind of pointed behind his shoulder like that at us. And but it's been a hard life, and it's just been a struggle. And I guess I just wasn't thinking very good, and I could see the baloney coming right out.
Oh yeah.
And I just was nudging my husband. I just like, but the judge was like, oh, you poor thing. Well, since it's your first time, I'm just going to let you go. And, but you need to, stop doing this kind of thing, young man. So when we got home, I called a dear friend of mine who was the chief juvenile probation officer, and she knew him very well. And I said, okay, here's what just occurred. She went, oh, for Pete's sake, was that Judge so-and-so? Yeah. She said, all right, Irene, what do you want me to do? I said, well, here's what I'd like. I'd like for you to call and say that the judge changed his mind and that he was going to have to be on probation for 6 months and see a probation officer, and he was going to have to pay a fine every week. And I said, it can't be much because he doesn't earn much, but $5 is
got to be something for him, right?
Right. And so, can you do that? She said, sure. So I'm not sure how legal it was, but That's what this is years ago.
Right.
He's now 47 years old. So
Right.
that's how long ago this was. So that's what happened. And so every week for 6 months, we had to haul him 16 miles to the probation officer, right? He talked to the probation officer, paid us $5, and then we'd haul him back home. And, he never stole anything again after that. I mean, he was like, why did the judge change his mind? I said, well, I guess he got to thinking about, if he lets you off on this, then you'll think, oh, I can just use that same reasoning again. And next time they'll let me off again. And that's not going to happen because it'd probably be a different judge. And so I'm thankful that the judge made that decision. So we didn't even tell our son that we were in cahoots with juvenile probation until like he was 30, and he just like, oh, Mama, I can believe you did that, but it sure stopped me from stealing things that weren't mine, But we do what we have to do as parents to instill the
logical consequences.
When you do the crime, you're going to have to pay some way and somehow. And
There's gotta be some consequences.
There has to be. And it's funny because as he had his kids and now his grandchildren, he has 2 little grandkids. It's like he's saying these things to them, and he'll say, "Mama, did you just hear what came out of my mouth?"
Yeah, I know.
I said, "I did," and he said, "See, I learned it all. I just didn't practice it very good in the beginning." So that's what we do for
amazing.
all the kids that we bring into our families. I think for however long we have them, it doesn't really make that much difference sometimes, I think, because each little thing that happens during that period of time can have some meaning to that child that they can draw on at some point in their future. And so that's what we need to do. Well, Debbie, our time is up, and I'd love for you to have whatever closing words you'd like. Talk just a little bit more about your book and how to get it.
Okay. You can, the name of the book is Raising Other People's Children. And the probably the easiest way to remember to get it is raisingotherpeopleschildren.com. That's a website just for the book. And then my website is debbieausburn.com. And it talks about my book. I have a blog there that people can subscribe to and get updates of just little pieces, things that come to mind for foster parenting and step parenting. And I think the easiest, probably the shortest summary I can give to end people with is this is the most challenging thing I've ever done in my life. But raising my children, I don't have, like you, I don't have biological children. I've just collected my family over the years. It is the most challenging thing I've ever done in my life, but it is the most rewarding thing. In spite of all the challenges and the heartbreak, I would do it all over again. And if I can do it with all of my failings and frailties, then anybody can do it.
Amen. There was people saying, well, what are the qualities you have to have? And foster parents they're just such special people. I said, no, just normal everyday people who hit and miss like anybody else.
I am not patient. I am not long-suffering. I am not tactful. All of these things that you're supposed to be, I am not. But you care about kids. You make a commitment to be there even when you don't care about them that particular day or time. And you just learn how to hang on to them until you absolutely have to let go.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you so much for your time
today
and your words of wisdom, because you do have many words of wisdom. And I just want our audience to remember that we'll be here every Tuesday morning in the next 3 months, and particularly during May as National Foster Care Month. Be watching for other things that are coming through from the NFPA to help celebrate families and particularly families who do foster care. So thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with our friends at United Healthcare. For more information about United Healthcare, please visit www.uhc.com.